folks. I wanted to do a real quick video that I'm hoping will help anyone who's dealing with a kind of windy whistling noise from their front passenger driver's side door on their Equinox EV. I didn't have this problem with my 2024 Equinox, but I noticed on my 2025 it had a very discernible whistle coming from the passenger side door specifically. I noticed it seemed to be worse on windy, kind of cold days, whereas on warm days it seemed like maybe it was sealing a little better and you wouldn't really hear wind, like the wind noise, or maybe there's just, it had to be a certain amount of wind to kind of push through the gap a little bit. So when this issue, when I first noticed it, I immediately took it to the dealership, which is, obviously what you should do, generally speaking, since they're going to be best to help you, especially if you're still under the bumper-to-bumper warranty. And what they ended up doing was they replaced kind of a lower plastic sealing section, like on the part of the door that's kind of below the window. Because I noticed that like there's this plastic tab on it that wasn't like kind of staying put. It would kind of pop off, and it's not a tab that's actually secured by glue or anything. It's just kind of meant to kind of stick onto the metal, and it wasn't really doing that. So they replaced that whole plastic piece, and that did reduce like the worst of the wind, it seemed like. I mean, I'm hoping I'm not just imagining it. But what I found was there's still a whistle that would occur, particularly again on the cold days. And so while they were willing to do that first repair, once I came back, they were kind of like, well, we can't really reproduce it, because of course the day that they were trying to reproduce it, it was sunny, so it wasn't having the problem. They were trying to be flexible and be like, hey, if you can bring it in on a cold day or something, we can try and reproduce it again. But I figured it's probably a lot of hassle to try and go through this multiple rounds when they may or may not hear it again. But to me, of course, as the owner, it was noticeable, so I wanted to get it fixed. So what I started with was basically some painter's tape. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to basically wrap this painter's tape, just like do a path of painter's tape around all the edges of your door. So just cover all the gaps with painter's tape for starters. And then if you basically after that, you just take the car for a drive and see if the whistling issue disappears. If it does, then for sure you've narrowed it down to that door. So you can start there. And then what you'll want to do after that is you can just start to remove pieces of tape around the door until you're able to reproduce the issue. So this will require multiple rounds of driving the car around, but I did find that was pretty helpful. What I ultimately found was it was definitely that little triangular window, like the spot where the door meets that little triangular window at the front. The whistling noise was right around there, right around the gap, the vertical gap for that. So what I did then was I bought a rubber seal off Amazon, just a random one that looked like it might do the job. And here's the example of what it looks like. I'll link it to it in description. Hoping that might not be contrasting very well, but you can see it's just like a little piece of rubber, just enough to be squishy. And it's just got a nice little adhesive on the back. It's sticky enough that it'll stay put, but you can still remove it. So I like that, without it just completely disintegrating. I found that this kind of rubbery material it seemed a little better for that, just because I didn't want it to be something where if I wanted to remove it, it's just gonna take like 5 hours to scrape off the remains. I found that the foam insulation stuff is way more annoying to remove, so I would recommend going the kind of rubber seal route if you can. That way, if it doesn't help you any, you can still remove it without it being a total pain in the butt. So what I did was I just did a loop of this around the existing seal. So obviously there's a big rubber seal already built in place by Chevy. And so I just did another loop around the entire door frame, just following the path of that seal, just on the outside of it a little bit. And I thought maybe this would help, maybe it was just the problem with the seal somewhere around the door. It didn't really make any difference. But what I found was that if I did a second loop, but it wasn't like a full loop in this case, I just did a loop from kind of the top of the door and then took it down to the bottom of the door. But it was just like following the parallel line of the original loop. That seemed to help with the whistling. I think it just allowed it so there wasn't really any space for air to kind of get into the gap between the door and the window frame, that little A-frame window. Because it seems like the problem was just that there was just a little bit of a gap between the A-frame window and the door seal. And it wasn't that the wind felt like it didn't feel like it was getting inside the car. I would rub my hand, I would like run my hand along the door on the inside while we were driving, and I found that it wasn't like I didn't feel any wind inside the car. So I thought the actual door seal itself was probably working, but it was just there was like just a tiny enough gap for the exterior part of the seal between that window and the door frame that the wind was catching it, and then it was just making a whistling noise. As far as I can tell, that was the case. Here's the driver's side door for comparison, just so you can see what it looked like before I added the additional seals. So doing basically two lines of this stuff along where the door meets the A-pillar window, that seemed to deal with basically like 90% of the noise from that. Obviously, you're still going to always have a little bit of noise from the mirrors. Like, you can't get rid of that. That's just normal for all the Equinoxes. But if you're getting, like, in particular, like a whistling noise, I think that this will probably help you. Also linked to a couple other posts that have been made. You know, there's obviously multiple people who have dealt with this issue, and people have had kind of different solutions. One guy actually managed to get the dealership to fix it, which, like I said, I would try and do that first. If your dealership has a really good attention to detail, then maybe they'll be able to deal with that properly. For me, like, a big part of fixing this was I wanted to make sure it still looked reasonably close to factory. I want it to be relatively clean because it's a brand new car. I don't want it to look like it's like half patched up. So I found that this solution, you can see from the videos, I think it looks pretty clean. I don't think anyone who wasn't me would notice that it was like some aftermarket seal. I think it looks pretty much like the rest of the car. So I'm pretty happy with this. I don't know how durable this seal is going to be long term. Hopefully it stays, but it was pretty cheap. So, I can always replace it. And like I said, it comes off relatively cleanly, at least at first. I mean, maybe years down the road it'll be harder. Now, one thing you might want to try that I didn't was, since I basically had to run 2 rows of this seal instead of just like one to actually properly seal it, I think you might first want to try doing a row around the kind of exterior edge of the door instead of just putting the first seal right next to the existing seal, because like I said, it didn't seem to help really that much. But I think if you also maybe go the route of just finding one seal that's a little bit wider, like maybe double width of this one, then maybe you wouldn't need to do 2 rows of sealant, 2 rows of gasket. I think I've been using the wrong word this whole time. Yeah, you might find that's a little easier to do than this, because as it was, I had to do 2 rows of this to accomplish it. So if you can find a seal that's like double width of this, then you might just need to do it once. It's kind of unfortunate. It just seems like the design of that window, like where the window meets the door, is just a little overly complicated. And I think it can lead to this problem. Just, I don't know. I think they probably could have simplified the design a little bit to make it a little more reliable. But if nothing else, hopefully this might help you. I'm definitely glad to have it resolved, because that was starting to really bug me. And I didn't want to go back and forth to the dealership 100 times. Yeah, that's it for now. Hopefully this helps, and good luck.